We all know that Bayonetta is a way better action game franchise than Devil May Cry. I've talked about this subject extensively on this channel. It's one of the major things that I think defines me from most other YouTubers who are casuals and just, think Devil May Cry is the greatest thing ever because they grew up with it on their daddy's PS2, right? Whenever he would take a break from uh hiring hookers in that game, he would pop in Devil May Cry and let the child just run around a hallway like smashing puppets, and it's the most entertaining thing in the world to these people, right? Like they've never played like good action games, stuff like God Hand, Beautiful Joe, the original Bayonetta. Like it can't be more obvious that Devil May Cry fans aren't familiar with the wider world of action games, right? Because otherwise they would realize that DMC, it is simplistic. It is short. It is easy. It's not all that memorable. The characters aren't all that cool, right? Like there's all these reasons not to be a fan of Devil May Cry. That it's shocking that the myth that Devil May Cry is some top tier video game franchise has persisted for so long, right? Like it's not even the top in its genre, right? Let alone like the wider world of video games. And Bayonetta, I think, is like the poster child for why Devil May Cry is such a failure of an IP. Like Bayonetta has managed to stay consistently good. It's managed to innovate. It has new features, new mechanics, kept the tone relatively consistent. It's been able to evolve, right? While what does DMC do? It did DMC2. It did 4 with like the backtracking and not playing as Dante. It did the reboot. It did DMC5, which is terrible in spite of what YouTubers want you to believe, right? Like Devil May Cry has never been good, right? The best thing you can say about it is that the aesthetics of the first game are kind of cool, but like that's it, right? There's really nothing to the Devil May Cry IP. And it was this realization, right? You know, that led me down this rabbit hole of just realizing that Doom, the FPS, Western video game franchise, is actually better than Devil May Cry, right? Like it is the better Devil May Cry, where like you're running around, you're like with simplistic combat, you're like fighting demons, you're shooting them dead, right? You're running around like these environments. Like when you play Doom, like you realize that like the game has better combat. It has better enemy variety. It has a more interesting location. It has better music, better gameplay in general. Like Doom, in all of its iterations, I would say. Like, I haven't experimented a lot with like a Doom 1 all that much, but the first two Doom games all that much, but I've played enough. Like, I've played Doom 3, like to a certain extent. I have a lot of respect for that game. Played Doom 2016. I didn't care for Eternal when I first played it, but maybe it's better than I remember. Like, when I look at the Doom IP, when I look at like what they managed to accomplish with that. Like, I see real evolution. I see real changes. I see real development, right? Whereas Devil May Cry is like still trying to convince us that like, oh, Nero is cool, guys. Like, please buy his game. It's hilarious to me, by the way, how Devil May Cry fans like attack Viola but try to pretend Nero is some popular character. Like, when you look at Doom versus Devil May Cry 5, like what do you see? Like Doom is this super intense, fast-paced action game that constantly keeps throwing waves of new demons at you in these crazy, unique environments that are fun to get around in, fun to navigate, fun to like try and like get the hang of, right? It's amazing. Meanwhile, DMC5 has you like walking down hallways, just mashing the Y button over and over again until you get to a boss, and it's just like, okay, like random encounters in Doom are more like intense than like bosses in Devil May Cry. Like the final boss in any Devil May Cry game would be like a mid-chapter like major enemy in Bayonetta, right? The difference in scale and like scope is just insane for these games. Like it's crazy to me that people look at stuff like Nilo Angelo or Virgil 3 and think that's like some top tier action game like boss design. They're not, okay? They're not interesting, they're not memorable, they're not cool. And like they don't the lore doesn't make any sense with like the whole Dante and Virgil thing and like nobody wants to talk about that. Like how poorly thought out like the Devil May Cry lore is and how it's now like retconned everything cool about it. Like from the original DMC to create his own like fan fiction fear like world that doesn't make any sense and isn't cool at all. Like has a character that nobody wanted near wha- like it's a joke, right? Like it is just a joke how people have like fooled themselves, delusionally fooled themselves into thinking Devil May Cry is not only like a good IP but it's like one of the best ever made. Like I would go so far, Devil May Cry is not even worth playing. Okay, it's not even worth thinking about. It's not even like it's not something that I would like recommend it to anybody, right? But what if I want Bayonetta? Bro, play other games from Hideki Kamiya. Play other Platinum games. Play the Wonderful 101. Play Astral Chain, right? Play like the Bayonetta sequels. Like there are so many better games you could play other than Devil May Cry 5 that you can't even begin to list them all, really. Like you're talking about like dozens, if not hundreds, of games from developers that just do what DMC did, but better, right? Like it's really not even close. And I would like to formally like to request that like we add Doom to that list because it's similar enough where there has to be some kind of overlap between those audiences, right? Like who would win in a fight between Doom Guy and Dante, right? Doom Guy, like who, like what would happen, like, why is this not talked about more? Why are these superficial similarities not brought up more often? Like, why is it not acknowledged that Doom is a more is a much is a much more relevant franchise in this current decade than DMC ever was, right? Like, when are we going to acknowledge that Doom does what Devil May Cry wishes it could do? Like, when are we going to acknowledge that Doom is the better action game? When are we going to acknowledge that Doom Guy is the stronger character? Like, when are we going to acknowledge that, like, that DMC just isn't that good to begin with? When are we going to acknowledge? When are we going to acknowledge that Capcom is a severely overrated action game studio?